Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about Fallout and Wasteland. Not Wasteland 2 or 3, I'm talking about the original 1988 Wasteland. The reason I want to talk about this is I see a lot of confusing comments online about the influence that Wasteland had on Fallout. Some people think it was a direct influence, some people think it was a really strong influence, some people say I said it was an influence, some people say I said it wasn't an influence. So let me talk about that. I did briefly touch on this in a video I did on a link it in the description on Fallout influences, and very clearly in there I say Wasteland was an influence. But I also say it wasn't strongly an influence. So let me go into more detail about that. And right now I can just say, if people go, was Wasteland an influence on Fallout? My answer is yes and no. So what I mean by that is there were a lot of people who worked on Fallout. I have videos where I detail what people did, and I say there were a little over 30 people when we shipped. I haven't talked to everybody, but my impression is most of those people did not play Wasteland. By the time Fallout shipped, Wasteland was a 9-year-old game. And I see a lot of you when people talk online about playing a game that's 10 years old, you're like, oh God, not 10 years old. Well, back then, I'll get to it, but it was much harder to play it. So many of the people on the team didn't play Wasteland. And of those that did, there were a few that didn't like it. And they asked me not to tell you their names. There were some people who were just like, I don't like this game. I don't want our game to be like this game. Most of them who played it, though, did like it. But most of them who played it also didn't finish it. They just played for a few hours and went, okay, I see what they were doing. The reason for this is it was really hard to play Wasteland, even in the mid to late 90s. It was not a frame-limited game, meaning the faster your computer was, the faster the game went. When you pressed a key to move, right, you would shoot right really fast. It was not a frame-limited game. In fact, it was made for PCs before PCs had numbers. So not even 286s. It was made for the 8086, 8088 family of PCs. And the best it could do was EGA. So when we were playing it, most of us had 486s. Some of us even had Pentiums. I think that was mostly artists because they really needed them to do the 3D art. But most of us were on 486s, and we had VGA cards. So, and our 486s probably were the ones with floating point coprocessors, meaning there were 46 DXs versus 46, I think they were called SXs. Just, back then it was super complicated and things were changing so quickly that the idea of playing a game from that long ago was really hard. And the main issue was speed. But still, enough people from Fallout played Wasteland that, yes, I would say a lot of ideas from Wasteland went in. I mean, yeah, it was a post-apocalyptic game. There's going to be a lot of similarities just right there. But a post-apocalyptic game made at the same company just a few years before, of course, it's going to have similarities. We're both violent, ultra-violent. Rangers are in both of them, and the Rangers were directly lifted, that idea, from Wasteland. There's a end slide that says, your life ends in the Wasteland. That was lifted directly. It was an homage. It was a deliberate thing. And then we had a bunch of other ones too. The biggest influence on Wasteland was similar to my tabletop D&D and GURPS games. It had that moral dilemma set of quests. Quests where there wasn't the perfect way to do it. There was just, well, you could do it this way or you could do it this way, and both of them had issues. The one I talked about a lot was the kid with his dog. The kid wants you to rescue the dog. You find the dog is rabid. You can't return a rabid dog to a kid. In fact, you end up usually killing the dog. So it's a tough quest. I liked stuff like that, and I wanted that in Fallout. And I often pointed to that exact quest to people and saying, hey, if you make quests, I like things like this. They don't all have to be like that. But that was a good one. Now, some things in Wasteland and Fallout were complete and utter coincidences. The fact that both of them had, and here's a spoiler, both of them had the final boss in the upper northwest corner, coincidence. Like I said, many people on the team never even finished Wasteland. if they even played it. So the idea that Wasteland's final boss was up in the northwest corner, they didn't even know. Now, our original lead designer, Scott Campbell, he did play Wasteland and he loved Wasteland. So, yes, there was a lot of influences that he had on that. And also, don't underestimate the fact that many of the people who worked in the original Wasteland, which was made at Interplay, even though it was published by EA, it was because it predates when Interplay was a publisher. Many of those people were still there, and we could go talk to them. The executive producer on Fallout, my executive producer Alan Pavlish, was somebody who had worked on Wasteland, and he had actually suggested some features that we said no to. He wanted something called a super loot square, where you'd be walking along, character would be walking along, and all of a sudden items would just pop out, implying you found them in the area you just walked into. And I'm like, we're going to make things a little more realistic and put items in containers. You can find containers. So there were some things that Wasteland did that we were like, no, I'm going to shy away from that. Now, it's true. Interplay tried to get the license for Wasteland for about the first year, maybe year and a half that we worked on it. But just to tell you, some of the people on the team were flat out worried that we would get it. We didn't end up getting it. But they were worried because, first of all, we'd already done a lot of stuff and we were very different than Wasteland. And there were things, if we got the license, they were like looking at things they knew they would have to change. But the second reason that people were worried we'd get the license is we already had a license. We were under license with Steve Jackson Games to make our system mechanics like GURPS. And they were worried that if we got a second license for setting, that now we had constraints in our mechanics and constraints in our setting, which really limited us creatively. And my biggest fear was you have two licensees on the same game. Who wins when those overlap? Let's say there's a mechanic that conflicts with something that was in the original setting for Wasteland. So something in GURPS conflicts with something in Wasteland. Who wins? It's Steve Jackson Games versus EA. If they both become intractable, guess who would lose? I can't tell you who would win, but who would lose would be the team. So I was actually terrified about getting a second license. Luckily or not, however you want to view history, we did not get it. So we proceeded under the one license. Now, yes, there were a lot of other influences on Fallout as well, and I mentioned them in the video, the previous video. There were books, there were movies, there were other games. So they had influences on Fallout, and yes, elements of Wasteland ended up going into Fallout as well. And so I think the bottom line is, depending on who you asked on the team, some people, if you asked, would go, oh, I was heavily influenced by Wasteland. Other people would be like, I don't know, never played it. Or I played it and didn't like it, so no, nothing I saw in there went in. I think the influence varied depending on the team, and especially because in that middle chunk of the game, the middle chunk of development towards the end, when a ton of content was going in, that's where the people who were influenced by Fallout put in things that were a little nod, or they were influenced by Wasteland, put in something that was a nod to Wasteland. But then other people put in things that seemed like they were from Wasteland, but was a complete coincidence, and they had never even seen it. So that's the closest I can give to an answer of what exactly was the influence of Wasteland on Fallout. And then, of course, I think since Fallout came out, starting with Fallout 2, massive divergence from where Wasteland went. And then with Wasteland 2 and 3, you can really see, I mean, if you compared Wasteland 3 and Fallout 4, those are very, very different games. So they may have started at the same route, which is post-apocalyptic United States, but they have diverged heavily since then. Anyway, that's the most detailed answer I think I can give on this.